As we explore the national perspective of the smart city question, we felt it would be important to start by exploring how the Government of Canada is supporting municipalities as they transition into smart city structures. This transformation will require all levels of government to work together to ensure that municipalities have access to resource, funding programs, support, and a long-term vision to transform and then manage technology-powered system. These changes won't happen overnight, but they are coming, and it is important that we start working to plan, experiment, and implement the foundations for the cities of tomorrow. The Smart City Challenge launched by Infrastructure Canada in 2017 is part of how Canada is starting to take serious action. To get us started, we are fortunate to have Natalie Frank, Director of Policy and Innovation at Infrastructure Canada, to share some lessons learned after the first round of the Smart City Challenge. Hello, Natalie, and welcome.
Hi, Ravi. Nice to be here. Thanks very much.
Nice to meet you too. Can you tell us a little bit about your role as a Director of Policy and Innovation at Infrastructure Canada?
Yeah, certainly. So my role at Infrastructure Canada, I work with a number of program colleagues, and I particularly provide advice and support in the way we think about innovations in programming at Infrastructure Canada. So the Smart Cities Challenge is one of our sort of flagship innovation initiatives, and I provide some policy guidance and support, and a lot of the collection of lessons learned, and we'll be talking about that today.
Thank you, Natalie. And now the stage is yours.
Thanks very much. So again, merci beaucoup de m'inviter aujourd'hui. Thank you so much for having me today. And I'm really pleased to be able to share some of the lessons that we've learned drawn from this Smart Cities Challenge experience at Infrastructure Canada, and to take this time to tell you a little bit about what we're seeing. I'll give you a little bit of context. I know Ravi mentioned a bit at the outset, but for those who may not know, the Government of Canada did launch this Smart Cities Challenge in 2017, a $300 million initiative, and really the first of its kind that we initiated as a federal government. It's often what my colleagues refer to as a grand challenge, which means that we started with a very open question to drive innovation. And in this case, it was to drive technology-enabled change at the local level. So we started by asking communities to engage with residents and identify key issues and key challenges that they were experiencing within their community, and then to look at how data and connected technology could help to solve those challenges. We established a jury of experts from across Canada. In 2018, they reviewed applications of that very first round of the challenge. The group was narrowed to 20 finalists, and in May 2019, 4 winning communities were selected. Now, there is a lot that I could say about these really wonderful projects, inspiring projects that were identified as winners last year. We did hear from Montreal a couple of weeks ago, and their very exciting winning project. And you'll be hearing from Kathy Kennedy soon about the wonderful work that they're doing in Guelph. So I don't want to steal Kathy's thunder. What I really wanted to focus on today was about lessons and what we're seeing at the national level about smart cities. So the way we think about smart cities and what we do in our organization, we tend to talk about this as an experiment. And I like to say it's an experiment on 2 levels. So in one instance, we're examining how we move the markers on smart city capabilities in communities across our country. So it's the smart city experiment. But it's also an experiment in how we're applying new funding models and new ways of delivering government and financing interesting, innovative initiatives. So this slide just speaks to 3 key takeaways of lessons that I want to get into a little bit with you today. So let me explore them with you a little bit one by one. The first lesson on the smart city side of the experiment, a really interesting finding, is that we discovered that innovation, ambition, and capacity in communities is actually not about size. And I say that because when we embarked on this program, it wasn't clear at the outset that something that was based on this concept of smart city would actually resonate in a country like Canada, where we know that we have, of course, very many big cities, but also quite a lot of small cities and small communities and a number of medium-sized communities. And it wasn't clear how this smart city notion was going to resonate and really inspire communities across the spectrum. But what we found was, in fact, that this technology ambition actually exists in communities all around the country of all different sizes. And that size wasn't a determining factor. And we had 20 Indigenous communities applying. We had half of our applications coming from rural and small communities, which was a wonderful outcome. And we also found that innovation capacity and investment levels in communities were not necessarily correlated with size either. So when we surveyed our applicants, we asked questions like the degree to which municipalities are investing in human resources in their towns and cities for innovation. We asked about budgets and financial resources. And we discovered that there are some small communities that are really leading the way. There are some larger communities that would appear to have a lot of capacity, but maybe doing less. And that size was not the determining factor. So that was a really key finding. The second lesson I want to talk a bit about in the Smart Cities experiment is a lesson about need and where the priorities are in communities in Canada. So because we started with a question about need before we jumped to the technology issue, we actually did learn a lot about what matters to cities around our country and where they're seeking innovative solutions for what types of problems. And it wasn't always the things that you might expect when you think about or hear smart city and smart technology. And in fact, the thing that I like to highlight here is that the largest proportion of themes that we saw coming out of applications right across the country focused on social and civic issues. And it's an important point that I like to highlight because for me, it underlines something really fundamental about where the technology sector can seize opportunities and understand growth in the market in our communities in Canada and partnerships with public partners because it's a signaling of the type of market and demand that exists, and it may not always be in the usual places you might think with smart cities. And the third point I just wanted to highlight when we talk about smart cities and the lessons is that these smart cities projects were also really driving new approaches to how communities plan and operate. So when we surveyed participants, we found that the process of the challenge actually allowed them to develop, allowed them to see a number of effects beyond just having a smart city project. So things like increasing the consideration of use of technology, connected technology and data to solve problems in their town or community or city to a very high degree, over 70%. It introduced new ideas into community planning, 67%. And since I'm also talking about how we found that this creates a shift in how communities plan and operate, another thing that I just wanted to highlight was that this new way of operating requires new tools for city managers. So we did see that various communities signal challenges on questions related to things like data management, privacy, and cybersecurity. And we've taken that observation in my team. We've been working with the University of Ottawa over the last few months in developing a really neat little tool. We call it the Smart City Toolkit that we hope will fill in some of the blanks for people and some of these challenges. And I really wish I could show you the link for it right now. It'll actually be going live in just a few days, but we'll be sure to send out information about that in the coming days as it becomes available. And the last few things I just wanted to highlight in the little bit of time I have left. I talked about smart city takeaways and lessons, but let me say just a few words about government innovation, because that's the other thing that we're really learning. And here are 3 key points that I'll get into very quickly. The first one is just the use of a challenge, the use of prizes and a contest as a public instrument. We were doing it with the intention to create momentum for innovation, and we certainly found that happened. This is a slide that just showcases some of the engagement metrics that we track. We like to cite with our friends in our own department that we have the most popular web pages on our department's website. it was really the kind of initiative that brought a lot of attention, and it's the kind of thing that can really excite people. And we think that the resident engagement part of what we're doing has been a key component of that. The second lesson in governance and innovation has been about transparency and openness and the degree to which that creates ripple effects in the ecosystem. So we put everything online. Our applications, screening, scoring criteria, lots of video material. It was a tool to really engage and get participation awareness across the academic sector, public sector, private sector. And we know that it helped to spark partnerships. We know that it allowed researchers to do studies on this work, and it even led to a course at Carleton University. And the last lesson I'll just speak to very quickly is the lesson that when we do this type of new funding model, we call it an outcomes-based funding model, that it's not always easy, and we're really muddling through it in some days. The tools and procedures that we have as governments are still catching up to enable us to do this well. And here our challenge was designed explicitly to reward outcomes rather than outputs, to give us the tools to learn as we go in our funding instruments and make adjustments as we go. And what we've discovered is that that's harder to do than it sounds in a government environment. And it requires a shift in the way we do government. It requires us to measure outcomes in a much more robust way, to understand theories of change, and even just to know what to measure, and to work with data and set baselines in a much more detailed way. So really changing the way we do government. We're learning as we go, and we're still doing that. So let me just end by saying that I know that we're living through a particularly challenging time right now. And what we've really seen, maybe the biggest takeaway, the biggest lesson that I want to share, is that these kinds of innovations and the application of the lessons couldn't be more salient and more important than they are today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. We have a question from the public, if I may. So Ashley from Montreal, she wants to know, what was the biggest surprise you saw in your first year of the project?
The biggest surprise. One of the reasons why I share those figures about the different thematics that we saw coming out of the communities and the types of issues that were coming to the forefront, maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise, but I'll confess it was a little bit to me. But when I came into this role and thinking smart cities, I thought we were going to see all kinds of things about technology, but really the way the program was designed allowed us to surface the kinds of issues that were most preoccupying for communities around the country. And so that we ended up seeing projects that were focused on youth wellness, on seniors inclusion, on Indigenous reconciliation, on civic engagement, lots of projects on health, on food security, the Montreal project and Guelph are both speaking to food security. And they weren't the things, I'll admit, they weren't necessarily the things that I thought at the outset were what we were going to see the most of when we said, Canada, do smart cities. What do you want to see with your smart city?
We have a second question. What are the main barriers to innovation you saw?
Well, as I said, the innovation that we're seeing is happening on two levels. And so it's always a challenging question because I think about the innovation that's happening locally, and I think about the innovation that's happening for us as a federal government. I'm probably better placed to speak about the challenges federally and what we're seeing at the national level. It's really been that last slide that I spoke to about our tools and procedures. Honestly, we are as governments, we rely a lot on the structures that we build for funding, for agreements, for setting up things to make sure they're fair, and to put in all the appropriate due diligence, which we count on, and citizens count on us for accountability to be able to do that. And one of the things that can make innovation hard is that those things can create their own momentum, and they can sometimes create barriers when you're trying to change and transform. So it's really striking the right balance between relying on those tools we have as governments that ensure our fairness and openness and accountability, but also having enough wiggle room to be able to push the boundaries and change things. Sometimes that can be the biggest barrier.
Another question that we have is from Aaron. Is there any option for a second national challenge?
Thank you for that question. So when the Smart Cities Challenge was announced, it was always intended to have more than one. It was announced as a 10-year initiative, and we've now, because we've been living through the COVID crisis of the last number of months, we have been a little bit delayed in how we're planning the next round, but it has always been in our plans.
Do you think that the next round will be virtual or hybrid?
Well, it was always virtual at the beginning. In a sense, it was both. It was very my colleagues call it boots on the ground. It was very physical, but because it's a technology initiative, we rely on technology. And now, over the last number of months, we've even come to depend and to see even more how powerfully the technology can connect us at times when we physically can't. And so I think it'll only add to the opportunities that will get created over the coming months.
Natalie, thank you very much for your time. That's all the time that we have. I would have more questions on the infrastructure of data, transparency, but if they have more questions, could they reach you through LinkedIn, or is there a website?
LinkedIn, certainly. I am reachable on Twitter. I can share, I'm not sure if the conference has my email address, but you can certainly reach me by email. I'm a public official, you can find me. Également en français, si l'auditoire veut me rejoindre en français, il me fera plaisir de répondre en français également.
Merci beaucoup, Nathalie.
Merci, Ravi.
Thank you.